working on many issues. So let me first begin by saying that uh, SDG agenda, the Sustainable Development Goal has, and as all of you know, has emerged from a long struggle and long history of how world community has looked at development and debated over it, contested over development. We know, all of us who are demographers know from the times of population and development world conferences, then that how development and population were always seen as two um, parameters, intertwined and interdependent, and often seen as population seen as something determining the development in a manner which was detrimental because of its growth, and distribution never ever occupied the kind of space that should have. Uh, but then there has been a whole history of the discourses on development. Um, and there have been many different approaches to address development, the world development. And I'll not go into that detail because I think I'll focus on the SDGs. And then came the Millennium 2000 MDGs, and MDGs were, uh, were a shock to the world community, in my view, because, and many like me who believe that the Millennium Development Goals actually were reductionist in nature. They undermined all the long history and the discourses that went in defining what constitutes development. The ICPD conference in Cairo, the Fourth World Conference on Women and Empowerment, the Beijing conference. There were many other conferences that happened. They were completely sidetracked, and a few technical specialists came up with the 8 Millennium Development Goals, which were the bare minimum, the minimum essential that they thought the world should achieve. And there was only one goal on gender equality, which was also about only primary and secondary education, about girls achieving primary and secondary education level. And after that, it was all target setting and working around those. So, and that was a disappointment because a lot of feminist organizations, the activists, the ones who were really concerned about development, um, they were disappointed. And came 2015, when the world community looked back, they found that there is a lot that has not been done. And that is a time when the Sustainable Development Goals were brought in. Now, in this book, we have we take that Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, is characterized by 3 essential principles. That is, that they are, and in those sense, the SDG is really a departure from the MDG, because they have the principle of universality. That means that they imply that the goals and targets are relevant to all governments and actors, and they don't really are for the low development and middle less developed countries, and that's very significant kind of a principle. And then the other principle is about integration, where it actually means that um, they are really not a list of separate goals, but they are rather a system, a network of highly connected goals across the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, which is the economic aspects, the environmental aspects, and the social aspects of development, which they call in Sustainable Development Goal agenda as people, prosperity, and planet. So 17 goals with about 169 targets. They cut across these three broader domains of development, which is economic, environment, and social pillars. And the idea which is most critical, which is the most important, is that no one should be left behind, which is the last principle. And perhaps the most critical principle of SDG is no one left behind. No one should be left behind. And that means there has to be, it sounds rhetorical, but if you think seriously about this particular tenet, this means that there has to be a paradigm shift in the way we look at development. And that means how do we, first thing, what kind of information we generate and how we use that information and data. To what extent the information and data and the development interventions are localized, and who determines development becomes the key drivers of development. And I think that was a major achievement, and I suppose the highlights of SDG Agenda 2030. Well, given that I'm wedded to this whole idea of universality and the idea of integrating, looking at different indicators and different goals and different development paradigms as a connected, as a whole, rather than as separate siloed pieces. And I personally believe that at the root of this development is how power dynamics is played out. Who defines what is the development for whom becomes so critical, and therefore gender in its intersectional nature becomes the lowest denominator of defining how development should be undertaken and how it should be evaluated and how it should be shaped. So keeping that in mind, keeping this conceptual kind of underpinning, we invited the authors to contribute from their own standpoint in whichever thematic areas they were working, to add to this discourse, whether the SDG, and especially the Agenda 2030 and SDG 5 are really meeting these three principles of what they claim, universality, integration, and and leaving no one behind. So now, since there are 24 papers and there's not much of a time, I thought I'll just reflect on three papers, because I think those three chapters in this book are the cornerstones of our thinking around how SDG should be seen, and they define the boundaries within which all other authors have contributed from their own vantage points. The first, the chapter I have chosen just to reflect, and I'll read out some passages from there, is the one which my colleague Nalini and I crafted on a feminist critique of Agenda 2030 and SDG 5. If one reads this chapter, one would know that we have truly highlighted the positives of the Agenda 2030 and SDG 5, as they were markedly different and substantially different from MDGs and any development discourse that happened before in the world. But we have also critiqued for a couple of important reasons, and I'll take you through one by one without going into details. I would really love you to read the book and read the chapters and then critique if you agree or don't agree with them. But then our major hypothesis emerging from the meta-analysis of some kind of a scanning of literature or landscaping the literature on this issue of how feminists have looked at the development agenda. We have come up with about 5 or 6 um, uh, uh, pointers that, in our view, are the major critical points that the SDGs have not addressed, and they in fact raise questions or raise doubts in our view about the intent of the SDG. Uh, so let me just read that out. What have we said in this particular chapter on the flip side of SDG. So the very first thing that we think is, and literature, all the documentations would support, is that although it was a very consultative process, SDG was prepared with some kind of massive consultation that happened across the world, right up to in the country and sub-country national levels. There were committees and subcommittees. The process was happening, and they were all fed into that kind of a process. But despite this kind of consultative processes, the participation and voices of women's rights organizations from the global south remained constrained during the negotiation that shaped Agenda 2030. A lot of the real negotiations happened in New York. It was difficult to travel. There was funding, always an issue for global south organizations to go and be on the table. So those voices were largely absent in the agenda making of 2030, in shaping the agenda. And the second piece that happened, which we were struck, which anybody would be struck, is that in shaping of Agenda 2030, the corporate sector, the private sector, corporates were really playing a major role. They were given kind of UN agencies gave corporates a free space to shape the agenda, and that has its own implication. If the corporates begin to play in shaping the SDGs, which is essentially about those who are at the receiving end of profit making, the flip side of profit loss, those on whose cost the profit is being made. So it's a delicate balance that corporates have to always strike when they talk of development, without keeping profit as a primary motive. And I know that this is a discordant kind of a point at the in the current discourses, but the fact is that the UN, in fact, almost accepted corporates as the engine of development, and wanted them to fund the development process. So that shows up how SDGs. The second point, if you read the SDG documents, they do not challenge the neoliberal power structure and paradigms. Rather, they reinforce them, in fact. And you have to really read this chapter to get to this. But the very assumption that grow first and redistribute later is a proviso that the SDG uses is questionable. In fact, the third point that we raise here is that the underlying assumption of linear and direct relationship between the economic growth and gender equality has always remained questioned. In fact, there are many evidence. Naila Kabir has written a lot on how the development, material development, or the development as defined in the standard paradigm ways, do not necessarily mean that they have transformed the relations and the situations of women in those. So there is because there are reasons, and I would not go into that detail. But the fact is that this assumption of linear relationship is questionable, and I think it is not a big brainer to think why. Um, and the other, and in fact, we have seen one piece that we have seen how increasing workforce parts in world over, except India, there has been increasing participation of women in the labor force, but they all, by and large, women have been employed and have their employment has gone up in the lowly paid and low skilled kind of uh, jobs and in the labor market, and they are largely concentrated in the poor quality informal sector jobs and face higher risk of vulnerable employment. So the growth has happened, economic development in terms of the GDP has happened, but in terms of how women have gained from this have uh, have not been commensurate with that kind of a growth where women's employment has become more vulnerable, in fact, lowly paid. And in India, in fact, has reversed. We have seen how labor force participation of women have declined, and there are many hypotheses, there are many reasons, including from measurement to how we define the participation labor force. But the fact is, and the fact that if the income goes in the family, a lot of women voluntarily give up. But those are all hypotheses. But the fact is that um, the with the expansion of a market, the women's participation in the paid employed work has reduced and is not directly linked to the growth of economy. So there are gaps, and I think one could read in the chapter we have elaborated on this. The other point is that there is in the SDG there is no accountability set for private sector despite its growing prominence. And there's really no, the SDG is silent about document about the central role that the corporate plays, but there's no accountability on them. With the shrinking role of state as a development agent and corporates taking the central role, I think it's very important that there is a need for putting greater accountability to them. Uh, well, the other point that we have elaborated in this chapter is how the empowerment and human rights perspectives are largely rhetorical in Agenda 2030, and gender transformative approaches that engage with men and masculinities are conspicuous by their absence. So we see that the language that the feminist communities have always been struggled to situate in the center stage of development, which is transformation, is missing in Agenda 2030 and the SDG 5. Then we also see the critical concerns around unpaid care, sexual reproductive health rights, and women's participation and leadership are watered down within the framing of SDG targets. So, um, so, so this chapter really talks about that on a lot of fronts, the SDG Agenda 2030 and SDG 5, Agenda 2030 largely has not really um, raised difficult uh, issues, has not put the framework to hold development stakeholders or the ones who are doers of development within the questioning them, and the promise to leave no one behind, which I said in the beginning, is weakened by unclear articulation and operationalization of intersectionality and inclusion. So, in the in fact, leave no one behind is a tenet which has been complete. It is mentioned somewhere but one does not know how does one really address this in the absence of um, local and disaggregated data, and having their voices represented in the framing of development. It's very difficult to imagine how does one really reach out to the last person on the mind in the development. So there are many reports and there are many studies around this, and we have referred to the fact that this remains largely rhetorical. We have also pointed out that while there is an emphasis on measurement in SDG and developing scores and indexes, but there is what does not get measured is very as important as what get measured. What gets measured is important, but what does not get measured is as much important as what gets measured. And we have seen that the lot of the time the and again within the localized context of SDGs, it's very difficult to have a sense of how the pathways of transformation has happened. Are there ways? Is the development that is coming as a top down is really making the population more vulnerable, or is it really shifting them in another direction? Is something that is not documented and but does not know and does not get measured at all. So as a result, the upstream issues are never measured. Structural issues are never measured, and they don't get paid. They don't get or the attention that they need or that should be given to them. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic came in between and has further created a complication. But we, in the chapter, have suggested a few way forward directions. I'll come to that later, but I just want to pick up the other chapter, which is by Peter Aggleton, and he and his colleagues have talked about one glaring omission in the SDG Agenda 2030 and SDG 5 especially, is about how it has completely ignored or bypassed the sexual and gender diverse groups. It has, in fact, it is not by any its omission is not by oversight, but it seems it's deliberate, because the "no one should be left behind" has been used as a camouflage to cover the entire diversity of of uh, that of people and population that needs to be addressed. And I just and as a result, the SDG 5 almost sounds like a document between men and women, rather than talking about the larger diversity frame or spectrum. I just read out a paragraph from that chapter, and it speaks volume, where Aggleton says that while the binary gender system remains powerful in shaping social system globally, it has long been recognized that focusing discussions of gender only on those who are gendered female perpetuates the false belief that men, boys, and others are somehow outside of gender. Not only does this erase important ways in which a binary gender system is equally reliant on constructs of manhood and masculinity, it also limits the potential for recognizing how power operates within the system. Although this nomination, very interesting phrase that he uses, although this ex-nomination of men and boys from gender in the SDGs aligns with what has been recognized as a problem throughout the history of feminist actions, it represents a missed opportunity, in fact, in SDG. It actually represents a missed opportunity to build recognition of the power relations that underpin systems that are patriarchal, misogynistic, and harmful to those socialized as women and girls in every setting. It also omits attention in the SDGs to the need to challenge patriarchy in all the forms through political processes rather than only through the social development. And I think this is a critical point, that SDG gender equality is not only a social issue, and it's not only about norms, but how political processes add and become part to the whole process of creating inequalities, including gender, because gender then intersects with all other forms of inequalities. So, without meaningful recognition of the fact that gender is a system that impacts on everyone, there is a missed opportunity to ensure all people are engaged in the process of transforming the system. Nowhere is this more important than changing the very program that engage men as if they were the champions of change. And a lot of programs in family planning we've seen where men have been engaged to promote family planning in a very instrumentalist manner, as if they are the champions of change in gender relations, thereby consolidating their position as leaders and reproducing rather than remaking the patriarchal order. So, the manner in which the binary discussion and binary discourses have defined the larger paradigm of development has actually reinforced the men's position as the ones who are who are doers, and uh, they are the dominant positions as leaders, and has not recognized men as a gendered being. So, and then he goes on to talk about the other gender and sexually diverse population that are completely, they are not even mentioned uh, by any stretch of imagination in the SDGs, and it has, and they have been at the receiving end of the discrimination and stigma. We have seen how during COVID-19 the trans population did experience a massive, uh, you know, massive, uh, you know, their losses were, I think, uh, the immense, because they were not mainstream. They were not getting the services. So so that's the another chapter that I really thought a lot of many other chapters are there that have spoken about the excluded groups from the human population, um, disabilities and the gender and sexual diverse people who have not been reached through explicitly through the SDG 5s. So this is another chapter, and the third I just picked up a chapter by Renu Khanna and her colleagues. She is, and Sahaj as an organization has, um, has been part of the Equal Measure 2030, which is a global initiative of about 10 civil society organizations and a few private organizations to monitor SDG 5 in globally in 129 countries that they have been. And I think they bring out report. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. Equal Measure has produced uh, indexes and also has compared over time how many countries have performed on SDG 5 achievements. And what the two questions that they have addressed in this chapter. One, if national gender equality trends continue, so they have taken a particular index and then they have assessed over a period of time if what has been the progress on that particular index, and if by 2020 they have achieved certain rate of change, then they're projected that by 2030 will they achieve that target or not, and if not, then how much more time will they take to achieve. So it's a very interesting analysis they have done in this chapter. They've taken 5 key issues from SDG, and they have not only confined to the SDG 5, but sticking to the principle of integration. They've taken they have considered the indices across different goals. For example, access to modern family planning methods, girls in completion of secondary education, ministerial or senior government positions held by women, laws on workplace equality, and women's perception of safety. These are the five key issues that we have. They have reflected on this, and we have we think are critical to assess if gender equality is being achieved or not. And on all this, they have presented a very interesting analysis of what I said, the rate of change and how much time the global community will take, or the countries of the world will take, to achieve this. So, in this, I'll not go through everything, but I thought I'll pick out one data from. So they have produced a report called "Bending the Curve," which is very important. Read for anyone who's interested in looking at how SDGs are doing. It shows that this analysis shows that, and just look at the proportion of ministerial and senior government roles held by women. Data from Bending the Curve report shows that Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Rwanda, South Africa, and Sweden reached parity in both parliaments and cabinets. However, only 23% of the government minister posts globally are held by women, and 77 million girls and women live in countries that did not have a single female minister. A worrisome fact is that progress on this issue has slowed in recent years, and 40 countries have moved backward since 2001. In fact, in getting women into the positions of ministerial positions or government roles. So, and finally, I think critical to us, as I think all of us come from the demographers and or one particular sector of the development, um, the workplace equality for women, and how have the countries done. This chapter analyzes they and especially laws on workplace equality, which is very important. How and each country has been assessed with respect to what are the kinds of laws they have on promoting women's participation in the employment and women's promotion in the leadership ladder. And they have used seven indicators or seven questions to assess different countries. And these questions are: does the law prohibit discrimination in employment based on gender? Does the law mandate equal remuneration for work of equal value? Can women work the same night hours as men? Can women work in job deemed dangerous in the same way as men? Are women able to work in the same industries as men? Is paid maternity leave of at least 14 weeks available to women? And is dismissal of pregnant workers prohibited? And on this, we see India progressing from. So they have taken in 2009 what was our situation on the laws, and what is the current situation in 2020, with respect to these seven laws. And we see that India's score has improved. So there were only two laws in 2009 on workplace equality, which they added two more. In the meantime, by 2020, paid leave was added later, 14 days. And also um, uh, and adding was jobs deemed dangerous was also added. So um, we see some progress out of 7.4, uh, and they expect that if this is the rate of change, we might take, in a 2037, then we'll have all the laws, or at least critical laws, that would make women women's employment and women's workforce participation legislatively supported. But in this, the most critical aspect is the women's perception of safety. And I think there's a real dearth of data on women's perception of safety in India, and in many and most other places. And there is, uh, you know, so they have analyzed some data that are available from many different sporadic reports, scanty reports, but it seems that there's a need for you know uh, for enhancing that kind of database. So yes, overall, we this book at the end, I'll say that I'll stop here, and this by concluding that I'm just taking three or four lines from one of the chapters that um, and that really sums up our view about the SDG and SDG 5. We think that there needs to be a transformed view of who gender and sexually diverse people are, or diversity is, shifting them from the unknown to the knowable, to people we know and people like us, that is, human rights holders deserving a full support by duty bearers. Second, there should be recognition that a justice based agenda will not only benefit vulnerable groups but will also change the world for better. So, largely, most chapters have talked about whether there are um, uh, we have from the climate, gender and climate, we have issues from women's leadership in different sectors, gendered violence, of course, respectful maternity care, and transforming gender relations. And then we have budgeting, the entire cost of ignoring gender by uh, gender budgeting by Indrani Gupta from IIT. So yes, overall, this volume really talks about many different dimensions of, uh, of people's lives, and within the eco um system of where we live. It emphasizes that if SDG 5 have to achieve, or SDG have to achieve its goal, they need to shift quickly. They have to go back to the drawing board and really begin to question if they are gathering right kind of data. Are they making that data transparent and usable by those who for whom the data is meant for? Uh, is development being defined by the people for whom the development is meant for, or still remains the same neoliberal economic framework which has defined development from top to down, um, and rest everyone is just pulled into that kind of a uh, development. We have seen how monopolization of the agricultural products and the trade agreements have followed a very different kind of uh, pathways, completely in contrast with what SDG 5 intended to do in its document. So yes, I feel sorry to end on a note which sounds a bit of sobering, but I draw my strength from two things by looking at many different uh, analysis and reflections by my co-authors and co-editors, is that finally we have finally, I think SDG framework has brought the issues out of the closet. We have um, you know the issues that were not being discussed, they are being discussed and put on in the formal documents where the world community has come together to debate and contest and agree or disagree. But at least the issues are out there for the common agreement or disagreement. Um, now the question is, uh, while on some we are achieving, we need to move the needle to go into the processes, go up to the levels of institution changing, and making sure that international uh, colonial ways of thinking about development uh, is is uh, is brought into the development discourse in a meaningful way. Um, many many authors here have highlighted how we have still remained very colonial in our ways of defining development and reinforcing that development. So yes, so there are pluses, and then there are areas that we think the world is moving, but there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. That's what we think. So I'll stop here. I would really urge. I know I've been sketchy about, talking about all the chapters. It's not possible to cover all the 24 chapters, but I really think um, the equal measures work that we have included in this book gives us a sense of where we are, and the work by Peter Eggleton and the whole of Vic Chakrapani, Indrani, and others have also suggest that there are certain omissions, complete omissions in the SDG 5 that need to be brought back into the development agenda. And we, on our write-up, we question the the role of corporates, and how accountability framework uh, should be positioned in the SDGs. So thank you. I'll really now stop here. I've said many times I'll stop, but now I'll stop.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. I think you have raised many pertinent issues when we are talking about the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, with specific reference to SDG 5, which is very crucial. I just I was just thinking while you were talking, you have touched various sectors, including agriculture, women's work participation, the trade agreements, and the role of corporate sector, the role of private sector, the role played by the state, whether it is in the right direction or not. I think several issues have been brought up during your very brief talk. I think it's not an easy task, to summarize and make a very brief presentation of about 24 chapters. And I think you have, I know your capability, and I was always confident that you will be able to do justice to that. And you have proved me right. I think not only me, you have proved every one of us right. So thank you so much on behalf of Star Foundation and all of us present here. Professor Pandeji is there, and many other, Professor Adinarayana is there, and many people are there. Many of our friends are there. So now it is open for very brief discussion for the next 5 to 8 minutes. Any brief comments or any clarifications to Dr. Verma ji? Floor is open. Any questions? Any clarifications? Any comments?
There is no question, but we
Professor
can.
Pandeji?
Yes, yes, yes. Dr. Singh, really,
Please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
I felt very happy and glad listening my friend Mr. Ravi on a topic which is very complex. I must say that very nicely he has not summarized but presented a framework to think, or that lens of that gender lens which he has presented, how to look into that. Very, as you have mentioned, Dr. Somaji, all the various issues he has touched upon in his study, and also how sustainable that would be. That also he has given the idea and the direction. Uh, the various chapters also he has very helpfully summarized and brought in his framework. But still we always feel enthusiastic to learn each of those dimensions with some case history, some examples from where we can say that is this has been little bit closer to what was expected and than the other. So that kind of examples only Mr. Verma only can tell. So I was really interested to listen. For example, in case of India, can you say that how this government of India is taking up and how that has been moving forward in that direction, touching this limited dimension. Particularly when you said that how this development is being defined for whom it's needed. So because that our own country has been touching those development directions for which that was made. So I would like to listen his reflections or his own experiences or analysis from different countries and of this country. So that's my enthusiasm on that. Ravi.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. I could not really hear you very clearly because there was some issue with the microphone, or maybe it was a problem on my side. If Dr. Samyajulu, you have heard Dr. Pandey clearly, you can let me know. Otherwise, but I thank you for.
Sir, I also could not hear him properly. I think there was some disturbance.
Yeah.
Sorry. Am I audible?
There's a lot of echo, and yeah, we can't hear you. We can't hear you clearly. In fact, it seems as if is a muffled sound,
Okay.
as if your
Can you just tell your experiences of implementation of this development from rural perspective of any country which has been very close to that yeah, touching all these dimensions.
okay, okay, sir.
Is it audible?
You are audible, but your voice is not clear. Yeah.
Sorry, this is like internet problem. So you can go ahead, take a response.
Are you speaking into the microphone, or you using the headphone directly?
पांडे जी आप ब्रीफली लिख सकते हैं ना क्वेश्चन इन द चैट बॉक्स में.
Go ahead. What I was asked, what
Direct version for English.
Questions or clarifications?
Okay.
Pandeyji, if you can put it in the chat box, it would be better, sir, if possible.
Okay, so just to by the time people, I don't if there are other chats, but is there anyone else? I just wanted to say that in through this book in SDG 5 series, we are trying to say 3 or 4 important things through various chapters. One, that the SDG Agenda 2030 and SDG 5 have not found the kind of support that they should have, both in terms of material resources or the partnership that could take the agenda, the development agenda forward. So the intention of taking SDG agenda forward has always been bit of a challenge and bit of an issue, and there is, I think, it's for the world leaders to truly think about, if they want this development agenda to be meaningful, then what is it that they need to do in terms of providing resources, making data as disaggregated as possible to ensure a much greater engagement in the India. In fact, has produced 2019 the localization of SDG. The two reports that came from India, they were, I think, one of the first few reports globally that talked about the localization of SDG. We need to really see how does one translate, uh, the localization aspect of the SDG. I think which is the most critical and perhaps most expansive part of the SDG and Agenda 2030. If you take the development agenda to the local level, it means there is the entire process is put on its, is put upside down. In fact, from the way the development planning is done, I remember there used to be a time of community need assessment, and that will, on paper, there's always been a process from the bottom moving up to the block and district and the state level planning process. But is that affirmation we don't see in the global documents, in the processes that needs to be there in place. So one is that there has to be it's very clear that intention and the actions need to match. We also think that a second piece that we authors have brought out very well is that there are certain omissions, completely omissions, and they have been put under the larger rhetoric of no one should be left behind, but we don't see any operationalization of that aspect. And third, we think that there is very little by way of accountability, overarching. The most chapters written from any perspective and any entry point seem to suggest that there has to be a framework to hold the duty bearers accountable to what they're doing. So yeah, I think I'll just say that those are three takeaways of the learning from the SDGs so far. But at the same time, the discourse or the ideas on development in threadbare manner is out there for the world community to see and question, which I think is coming out of closet almost. To me, it feels like it is coming out of the closet, and and that provides a lot of opportunity to take it to the next logical step. So yes, that's the most positive side of the story. So Pandeyji, there is I'll just look at this on the India side. There are a whole lot of actions, but there is one which I have highlighted earlier, but I'll repeat on the how India has been promoting women's participation in the labor force. I think that's the women and girls to be treated as an economic entity, and to be able to promote them in the workforce has been the one of the most lagging part of on gender equality. And there we see that there is the policy and legal context of India. We have, so although India has the Equal Remuneration Act 1976, which mandates equal pay for the same or similar work, India has a gender, so we have an act. We need to make sure that that gets implemented, because gender wage gap is almost 34%. The Global Gender Gap report states that based on hourly wages, women earn on an average 65.5% of what their male colleagues earn for performing the same work. Niti Aayog's SDG India Index states that ratio of female to male average wage or salary earning received among regular wage salaried employed is 0.74. So by government's Niti Aayog's own monitoring, there is there's a gap that has to be filled in. Or you look at this, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which aims at enhancing the livelihood security of people in rural areas by guaranteeing 100 days of wage employment in a financial year to a rural household whose adult members volunteer to do unskilled manual work. There is a statutory requirement that one-third women's participation should be there under the scheme. Now we have seen that participation rate has consistently has been above this requirement. In fact, 55% in 2015-16, 56% 2016-17, 54% in 18-19. So women, more and more women are into they are using Manrega's opportunity, and that shows that women they want paid work. So they or if you look at the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, which was acted in 2008, the acts which has set up the National Social Security Board for unorganized workers and included their representation as members of the board. It defined suitable welfare schemes for unorganized sector workers by the central government related to life and disability cover, health and maternity cover. So these are the positive things: old age protection, any other benefit as determined by the central government, and also state government welfare schemes for unorganized workers related to provident fund, employment injuries, or benefit, housing, education schemes for children, and so on. So it's there. But despite these acts, studies show that benefits that they don't reach unorganized workers that should reach to them do not reach to them. So I think there are plenty of studies to show that. So I think as far as the Government of India's program on promoting gender equality is concerned, now look at the sexual harassment of women at workplace. Now it's a very real positive step. Now we need to we have seen that the data shows that largest proportion of women who experience sexual harassment in workplace come from the unorganized sectors. Actually, see there one of the studies showed that the among women who are most prone to sexual harassment to their workplaces, 29% are laborers, 23% are domestic workers, and 16% work in small scale industries. Now, and they don't take action against this because they fear that they would lose their job, or they'll fear of getting stigmatized, or absence of any complaint mechanism at their workplace. So given that about 80 to 95% women in the informal sector, and there is no cover to them with respect to many of the acts and laws that the Government of India has in place. So when it comes to gender equality efforts in India, I think the primary area is how does one reach out the informal sector, and how does one ensure that there is that they are they're covered under different schemes, and they are monitored. The places are made safe, their access is made safe. So, and that would enhance a lot of agency and empowerment. So, I mean, this is my partial response. I'm sure that there are many other initiatives that Government of India has taken to promote the girls' education, health. For example, female. Look at this India's amended Maternity Benefit Act of 2017. That employer must provide women with 26 weeks of paid time off. This is so good. This is good. But in the absence of paternity leave, if you don't, it almost reinforces that the childbearing and childcare is a responsibility of women, and it does not really put men into the space where they should be taking care. So, on gender equality, since gender is always has come to be seen as something which promotes only women, many laws and acts are towards women, but they don't change they don't alter the gender relations. I mean, this is a glaring example when you don't, if the paternity leave and if the accountability is not fixed on men to be participating in caregiving, and caregiving role is not valued, then any initiative that we take with good intention eventually reinforces the traditional paradigm of women being caregiver and women being the receiver rather than the ones who can take decisions. So it perpetuates the gender norms. So that's why what does not get measured in this whole process is very important to know. I'm not, but thank you for asking this question, because this is very
Subramaniam. We will close in the next 2 to 3 minutes, sir. Subramaniam.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Sir, good evening.
So,
After a very long time, a very refreshing talk from you, really good one. Just very quickly to just to continue what you are talking about, the maternity leave, paternal leave, and all these things. So, is the legislation will really help in getting this gender equality?
And that,
It's very. I know the answer is definitely no, but the more focus on instead of legislation, is it not the other ways?
is it not? What the other way? What did you say? I didn't get the last.
Yeah. Is it not the not depending on the legislation, but it is about the enabling environment or changing the social norms. This kind of activity, see, from a SDG 0.5 getting to 2030, depending on only the legislation is definitely not a sure way. You agree with me?
Yeah, but it is legislative support. Legislation is an important first step. It provides a cover, and then you begin the journey from there. So it is not the end of all, it is the beginning, it is the first step. So some of the the demand from feminist groups have always been for equal wages, non-discriminatory workplace laws, ensuring that women's access to work is made safe. They should be at least provided the the legislative support so that then action can be taken. Somebody can be held responsible. Someone can go and complain somewhere or put the grievances, and there would be someone to listen to. So in that sense, policy framework always are important, and they also convey the intent, clear intent. For any government, it is very important that they convey this intention that we believe in equality through the policy statements, policy measures that are, if there are issues on which there are contentions, then legislate them in the manner that the most discriminated, the most vulnerable feel empowered, that look, there is somebody who's listening to me. So the in that sense, the policy, and especially policies and legislative measures, in my view, become very important if the society is too diverse, and if there is a large group of interest groups that have very different ways of looking at their relations and their own development, and therefore the government's role becomes so important to bridge them all together, by bringing legislation, by framing policies, by holding a structural framework which allows everyone to then relate to. So, did I answer your question? I'm answering a very generic, but there's no denying to the fact that uh, that's the only first step, and that's not all. We have often seen. I was mentioning that how despite the laws, the women have been look at they've been losing out, because they were hired in the low paying areas, poor paid and poor quality. So there is a need to go beyond legislation. There's no doubt about it, and one does not have to wait. If you are saying that one should wait for legislation, so no, I think we should, as civil society groups, as a conscious citizens, we have to move forward. We just move forward in ensuring that some of the norms that we hold are changing. We encourage and we bring about shifts in ourselves. So I mean, that goes without saying that we must change our own ecosystem wherever we live. Does it make sense? Or
Oh yes, sir. Surely, the point. What happens. For example, many laws like Child Marriage Act and all that, they are stopping at legislating. That's it.
yes,
The follow up is not there. That's what.
yeah, norms are not changing, practices.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. So
So
develop.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah,
Nice
thank
book,
you,
sir.
sir. I
Very
think we will
nice.
close it. Dr. Basu, please.
Am I audible?
Basuji.
Thank you. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, please. Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. It was really mesmerizing. I was listening all at the entire talk of Dr. Ravi Verma, who was a great teacher at IAPS, followed by he's the pioneer in bringing out the qualitative research in the demographic sector, and also he has many path-breaking research activities on gender issues and masculinities to his credit. And I'm sure this book and these chapters will not only help the academician and researchers, it will definitely help the policymakers. Since I am closely associated in some of these policy level activities, I am sure and certainly. And sir, as you added the localization of SDGs, so we can see that district level indicators and then aspirational district program. Now, very recently, Niti Aayog has started aspirational block level programs, ABP. So where each block is taken as a unit of measurement and development of block on certain selected indicators. They have taken 39 indicators from SDG. And with that, it is expected to, there is a target given, or there is an effort, or strategy development plan is being made to reach or touch the state averages. So there are some effort, but whatever you have brought out, that's a very important issue. That one is you have explained the whole thing on gender lens, on gender issues, and second, involving corporate sectors without assigning much accountability to them. I think once we go through this chapter, at least I will acquire it for my office and for myself also. I'll get it, and once we go through all these chapters, we'll be able to learn in detail. Thank you very much, sir. Taking out your time in a Sunday afternoon or in the early evening of Sunday, and along with us, there are quite a good number of participants who have taken their time to listen and contributed to this program. I think we should continue all this, and on behalf of Star Foundation, a huge thanks to all of you, particularly to Dr. Verma and all the participants over here. I think it was very interesting. Thank you very much. We may close this session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jayant. Thank you, Samilu. Thank you all. Thank you, sir. very
Thank
much.
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Pandeji,
Thank you, sir.
Pandeji, thank you, sir.
See you
Thanks
sometime
to
in
all of
person.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.